All right, welcome back to another Rest, Eat, Move podcast. Today we're going to talk about mistakes, our mistakes, your mistakes. But I think as we get into this world where everything is so instant, quick, bullets and hacks and tips and tricks, we don't talk about the need for mistakes to create habits and the need for habits to have mistakes to create a lifestyle. And so we're going to talk about we must make mistakes to get to the place we're trying to go. Before we got on today, we were talking about golf. If you're going to try to be a good golfer and you're getting golf instruction or you're reading a book on golf or you're practicing and you're not willing to make mistakes, you won't really get better. You won't find something that works for you. And so in my case, if I just relied on golf instruction to say, swing the club this way and follow through that way, if I'm not willing to make mistakes, I'm not going to be able to, I think, perform like you can perform. And it's the same when it comes to health. So if you're too focused on, I never can eat this, or I'm too obsessive about doing that, these are some of the areas where people, I think, struggle to get the full benefit of a healthy lifestyle. So we're going to share some of our mistakes we've made. Some of them are funny. Some of them you just can't even think you were thinking that. But the goal is to help us understand we all need to make mistakes and we all will make mistakes. And having that freedom allows us to, in my opinion, go closer to the results we're looking for. So, Dad, welcome in. You just get done playing pickleball?
No, I took a golf lesson from Joe.
Okay. You make any mistakes out on the golf course?
He shows me what mistakes I wasn't making, so we're trying to not make as many of those mistakes. But yeah, really interesting what you said there. This from golf. He's trying to get me to compress the ball in the turf versus just picking the ball, hitting it fat, hitting it thin. But he wanted me to exaggerate that on film of my bad stuff. And so when you see the bad stuff and then you see the good stuff, you're like, okay, that makes perfect sense. And last night we're watching the Olympics, the men's gymnastics, and then you have the women's gymnastics. And I realize you think about this for a second, from how challenging that has to be to perform right at that instant, no mistakes. But how many mistakes did they have to make to get really comfortable in that high pressure cooker arena? And obviously they all had to make many, many, many mistakes for them to feel comfortable enough to perform at that highest level. So it's absolutely a must to make mistakes.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this before we got on, but I was watching the synchronized diving yesterday. And they make it look way too easy. If my job and your job was to synchronize just jump in the pool, we'd still fail. 1, 2, 3, go. You jump, I jump. But the way that they practice is the question is, how do you have faith to do a double backflip somersault twist from what is the platform height?
Yeah, there's 10 meters and yeah, it's
high. I've jumped off 3 and 5 meters. I think at Michigan State's pool before they got rid of it, and you're very scared at 3 and 5. They're doing a double backflip synchronized from 10, I think, maybe even higher. But they were showing how they practiced, and they practice with a trampoline and a bungee. So if they're trying to do a double backflip and they're scared to death about it because it's really about fear, you start there and you're willing to make the mistakes because it's not going to be life or death. When it comes to our health, I think that's part of the opportunity is, today, if I tell you to go eat, some of the things that we're going to talk about, if I tell you to go have creatine today, for an example, it's not going to kill you. You're going to be able to survive that. It's not going to really have a detrimental effect on your health. Same thing as if I told you to have a candy bar. It's not going to be life or death. But that's, to me, some of the fear that we see, and that's some of the fear that's touted in our society is eat this and it causes this. Or I think that book that came out is Eat to Live Longer or Eat to Not Die. There's a lot of this fear-based information out there that creates this I think this pseudo concept that we can't make mistakes is I can't feed my kids this. I can't do this. I shouldn't work out. I need to get 8 hours of sleep, or if not, I'm going to create these neurological disorders. Okay, we got to back up. I think the first thing I want to talk about today is we must make mistakes, and to make this become a mindset, we have to be okay with not always being perfect. And so as we talk about the mistakes that we've made in the past, the mistakes we made in the past are fine as long as we're willing to look in the mirror and say, okay, did this work or didn't it work? And are we willing to change going forward? So that's one of the things that I think I've changed a lot over the years, especially having kids, is sometimes you can be too rigid. I know these foods over here are really healthy for me, and I know these foods are really unhealthy for me. I feel like I understand that. But having the ebb and flow and the forgiveness of it, I think is something that I've learned that I believe really is an opportunity, especially in our society today, because there's two camps. I don't care what I eat, and I care way too much about what I eat. And so that's, I think, one opportunity. What do you feel about that?
When you and your sister were in high chairs, your mother went on a business trip to Texas, and I went to the health food store, and this is back in 1987, I think it was, and I bought some healthy version of macaroni and cheese. And I thought, this is going to be awesome. And I made the macaroni and cheese, and I put it in your high chair, and you had a little bowl, and you started eating it. And I'm like, okay, this is awesome. And about 15 seconds later, you both spit it out and started to cry. And I realized then that that's not the strategy. It's got to be a slow transition. And so, again, I tried to go to the highest level of macaroni and cheese at that point. And you can imagine what it tasted like in 1987. But I learned instantly, okay, how do you get your kids to eat healthier? It has to be a process. You can't go from Wonder white bread to sprouted organic bread. It's not going to work. So I learned very quickly that if we want to introduce my kids to healthier foods, it has to be a slow process.
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways. Slow process to get there, but also working backwards. So if you're, let's just use us for example. I think we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. We live in this space. If we were the food police, so if I went out of my office here, went down the street, went to a restaurant, and I was the food police and telling people what they shouldn't eat, that doesn't work either. So it goes both directions. It's a slow process to get there, and it's also a slow process to get people to get there.
And a lot of it's people watching and mirroring what people are doing versus being preachy. Yeah, I learned that a long time ago. It's okay, you can't be that food police or the exercise police. And sometimes, it's hard for us not to say something, but sometimes there's no curiosity, and it is what it is. They see it, but they're not asking the right questions. So that's a hard thing that I had to learn a long time ago, is I can't, if they're not asking the question, it's like playing golf. If they're not interested, or pickleball or anything we're doing, how do I get a little bit better? What can I do differently to improve versus if you telling them what to do? So it comes a lot better if they're asking.
I think that's a mistake we've both had to learn the hard way out of love and helping and wanting to give back. Is we want it so bad, but we have to understand that to change behavior change is the key. They have to want it. They have to have skin in the game. They have to have the self-awareness. And it's back to that golf lesson. If I was watching you on the driving range, you're hitting balls, you're hitting some really good shots, you're feeling pretty good about yourself, and I walk up and say, hey, can I tell you a couple things you're doing wrong? If you don't have the self-awareness, that's the worst thing you can say to someone, because you may have been feeling something that's working for you, and I come in and say, your arm's over here, and it's the same thing with food. If people aren't ready, or exercise, or even stress, it's a big challenge. Let's go into some fun ones. I think one of the early on, let's just say when we were in middle school and high school, protein powder was really gaining a lot of traction. I think one of the mistakes you've made, we've discussed, and I've experienced a little bit, is protein powders. Talk about the progression of using protein powders over the years and how you discovered that was a mistake and how you evolved from that mistake.
Yeah, back in my first bodybuilding contest in 1985, everything was protein, amino acids. I was taking amino acid supplements, and proteins were, protein powder. I was doing casein shakes, and I was pounding this down and gaining weight and building muscle. And I learned
Very
really,
strong.
yeah, very strong. And I learned very quickly. My skin's problems started to reappear, but I didn't pay attention because I'm getting ready for that. And then when I worked at the Michigan Athletic Club, again, protein back in the early 90s was a big deal. But I thought, maybe we should do this. And there's a protein powder called Vegifuel, with soy. And at our local health food store called Foods for Living, they had this big, huge end cap of Vegifuel. I promote the crap out of it. I do my meal patterning seminars. The next thing you know, the end cap is selling out day after day. They're selling all this Vegifuel. And then as time went on, I started realizing as I learned more about blood work and kidney function, the more protein powder that people were taking, you're seeing gout and uric acid build up, but the kidneys started to fall apart. And I started seeing this low glomerular filtration rate. And I started thinking about this, like, it's like putting sand in a radiator. These protein powders are isolates and they put tons of stress in the kidneys. And that was, many years ago, I thought, wow, this is not healthy for the body. And there's other better ways to get protein. So I promoted protein powders for many, many years, but probably for the last 20 years, I've really been against them because what they do to the kidneys. But way back in the day, that was, everybody's got to be doing protein powder, put it in your oatmeal, put it in your smoothie, whatever it was. And I've learned the hard way that that's not healthy for people and there's better options.
Yeah, and I think we're hardwired to find the most efficient, easy option that there is, right? That's how we're wired. It makes a lot of sense. You're trying to upgrade protein. These proteins come around and you try it. And so there's no problem with that. That curiosity is actually key, is getting your toe in the water, but then listening to your body, getting more information and making the ability. Now, if you held strong and said, no, this is what I believe and I'm not interested in peeking behind the curtain, then that's where I think people get stuck in their beliefs and stuck into their, even when things aren't necessarily giving the outcome they want. You think
yeah. The other thing we would promote a lot is egg whites, egg white, albumin, all these different egg white supplements or just egg whites themselves. And reality is I started learning more about the benefit of healthy fats. I started realizing the best stuff is in the yolk if it's coming from a healthier chicken. So these are all things you have to step back and go, wait a minute. I thought I was going down the right path, but I wasn't. And so you have to back up a little bit and just say, hey, listen, I've learned more, and these are the things I've learned, and these are mistakes I've made, and now I've learned more. And this, again, we're going to make more mistakes in the future, but you're trying to always,
I got some things on that. I think when I was in Paris, it was interesting. They don't refrigerate their eggs, and you ask them why they don't refrigerate. They don't pasteurize, and when they don't pasteurize, there's not little holes in the shell for the egg to go bad. And the job of the egg white is to keep the yolk from going bad. So it's a very easy thing to extract the egg whites. They don't go bad. You get the egg beaters, and they're high in protein, and it all sounds good on paper, but again, we start manipulating and creating these things, and we got to be curious of it and say, okay, this is interesting. Let's try this. But yeah, too much egg whites led to the craze of the egg beaters, which egg beaters gross me out. I don't know how people eat the egg beaters even today.
You don't hear much about egg beaters anymore, but yeah.
You go to a restaurant, you might want to ask where those eggs, where those eggs came from. What I was saying back to the hardwired is, so you went to from the casein to the whey to the Vegifuel, then you even said, okay, let's go to a plant-based protein. And so there's a continuum, but also at the end of that continuum, you realize there's a better way and vehicle to get protein, and we're really not as deficient in protein as the marketing for these protein powders would make you feel. So you didn't just stop at the casein was making your skin bad. You tried other things,
Yeah,
Then you,
tried them. Yep. And then we went to, today we have our own smoothie blend, which is this real flax, chia, hemp, and cacao. I'll throw Brazil nuts in, pumpkin seeds if I'm trying to add a little more protein and fat to my smoothie. So these are things now. I want the health version, but I also want the performance side of it. But yeah, I've learned a lot over the years. Okay, I tried that, but now I really, as I get older, I talk to everybody. You want to have healthy kidneys, so let's quit doing these protein powders. And there's other
and you want
options.
good skin, and you want good gut
Absolutely.
health, and
Yep.
and like we said in our last podcast and on energy drinks, it's about living a long time too. It's not just about what you do in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Let's talk about one of the mistakes that almost killed you, which was consuming protein bars. There's a story where you were hungry, maybe even thirsty, and decided to throw back a protein bar that maybe took too big a bite. I'll let you tell the story, and then we'll get into the protein bars.
We had a GNC right next to the Michigan Athletic Club, and many times I would get out of work and I'd go over and I'd get one of those metrics bars, and it was a chocolate chip, and it had, I don't know, 400 calories. It was just, I don't know, 100 grams of protein. It was a stupid number. Anyway, nothing healthy about it at all. It tasted amazing. But I was playing golf one day and I had one in my bag and I was hungry, but it actually started melting, and I put it in my mouth and I took too big a bite and it was like glue, and I almost choked on it. So I realized very quickly that, what is in this thing, that it was glue, but what is it? So yeah, I made those mistakes. And, today we look at, I don't call it a protein bar, I call it a food bar. But again, back to 20 grams of protein, 30 grams of protein, hardly any carbs, just complete garbage putting down the hatch. And people do this today. They'll take any protein bar at any convenience store. But I was that guy. If it had protein in
Well,
it, I was consuming it.
again, and we do what we're exposed to. So I think in sixth grade when we were moving and building a house, we'd get picked up from school, and so you'd take us back to the club, and we'd play around and cause havoc for a couple hours. And then on the way home, you'd swing into GNC after a long day of training and on your feet, and you're hungry looking for, and so you'd get this metrics bar, and it was actually cookie dough we liked. I don't know if you
It
got the
was cookie dough.
chocolate
That
chip,
was it. That was good. It was
chocolate chip, chocolate chip cookie dough metrics. This would have been 1996-ish.
or earlier. Yeah.
We'd get these bars, and at the time they did have this amazing cookie dough flavor, but they were chalky,
Oh,
and the
terrible.
texture is hard to explain, but you liked it. You didn't love it, but you liked it. And you'd think, okay, as a young kid, you could eat anything. But it reminds me of when I got older and started getting into this business. And a friend of mine, we went to the Big Ten championship, and we were going to Chicago. And he's a very interested, curious person about his health. And his girlfriend sent him these new food bars, these Quest food bars. They hit the market. They were going gangbusters. They have no sugar, high protein, very clean. And he pulled one out and said, "Hey, we're going to this thing." And I trust him, and I know he knows enough. And so I'm like, sure, I'll take one of those. I'm hungry. I'm never not hungry. And it just flashed back to this metric, because that's what it was. It was the same thing regurgitated. There's better, more undercover artificial flavors that you can say no sugar. But that's a big mistake we used to make, is just because it was a protein bar didn't mean it's healthy. Early on, we knew power bars weren't very good. Adewale came out with that natural, like that hippie, vegan type of a feel, and you start reading ingredients. And Cliff Bar at the time when they first came out was a pretty progressive, innovative bar, and over the years they changed it a little bit. But those are some of the mistakes, and a fun mistake. And if Kristen was here, she'd tell you we had our fair share of metrics, cookie dough, I don't know if it had 100 grams of protein, but it had a lot of protein in that bar.
I was just making that up, but it had a lot, and that's the attraction. There's attraction for the Quest bar. There's attraction for the Adwala bar. It's just, we got to, and again, it backs to one of our principles is the source. So at the time, we weren't talking about the source. We were just like, oh, that's a better option. And the Cliff Bar, I don't know what they sold. They sold it for a couple $1 billion, but people are still consuming them every day. They're in every airport, convenience store. And is it better than a Snickers bar? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, it's changed. So metrics bars, Cliff bars, protein powder, egg whites. Let's talk about exercise. What are some of the mistakes you've made in exercise? I'll share some of mine. I think the mistake that we can always make is to never change what we're doing and not to be open to try something new. One of the things I realized in my training routine, you do what you like. You also can do it in a way that you think you're doing it the best, but sometimes you can get stuck in the ways of just doing it that can create overtraining, maybe an imbalance. So for me, one of the things that I realize is you don't have always the self-awareness of your range of motion. It just is what it is. If I can't touch my toes, you may think I'm not meant to touch my toes. And I think that's one of the mistakes I made early on is I like to push heavy weights. I like to go fast. I like to sweat. I like to breathe hard. And if those things aren't checked, sometimes it's like, what are you doing it for? Well, you talked about yin and yang. And when you slow down and you start to, work on mobility and flexibility more than for a couple seconds, you realize, wow, I got some room for improvement. So that's one of the mistakes that I have made that I'm trying to evolve in my program is not overlooking the slowdown phase, the cool down phase, the restorative phase, just for the sake of I need to get a pump in. And I think that's one of the things that really has evolved a lot in my training out of necessity. But now looking back, I'm going to take that and take it into thriving and peak performance. How about you?
The same thing. I remember, when I first got in bodybuilding in '85, but way before even that, warm up. What is that? Stretching? What is that? Yeah. It was all about walking in the gym, and we would warm up by lifting a little bit less weight. And there was no cool down, no mobility, no flexibility, no restorative movements. I didn't do any of that stuff. In fact, Marty Hall, one of my closest friends, him and I were training at Body Action Weight back in the day. And we would meet there after work and we would just jump right into as heavy weights as we can. Jeff Watkins, all these guys, Denny Hilliard. And we would just push as heavy weights as we possibly could. Wraps, weight belts. It was all about the weight. It was never about the technique. It was never about the warm up. And then when I went to work for the MAC, ran into some different trainers, and now we're opening my eyes about training form and technique, body alignment, restorative type movements, mobility, flexibility, balance. That stuff wasn't even on my radar screen early in my career. So made a lot of mistakes, but everything was pushing heavy weight. No recovery days, definitely overtraining. Injuries were higher. Yeah. And I train people completely different than I used to from the beginning.
So what I take out of that, one of the mistakes, I have the top 5 mistakes you made. Number 1, weight belts. 2, parachute pants. 3, tank tops.
Wraps.
4, wrapping your knees. And then 5, I'm not sure you mentioned this, but the fanny pack. I'm not sure if that was a thing, but
I didn't do the fanny pack. But okay. Again, back to, load up, and then a protein shake afterwards, and just none of the stuff that I do today. Completely. I had to change. I was constantly injured. My shoulders were hurting, my knees were hurting, elbows were hurting. And, I never did any drugs. Again, I never went down that path, but I definitely was not training properly.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is sometimes we're blessed with an injury to create the awareness. The there's some freaks out there that can do that same type of training for a lot longer period without the side effects or the injuries or the burnout, whether it's genetics or just how they're built. But it will always show up. Is it going to
Well, I
be in your
remember,
30s?
yeah, I remember I was watching Fred Hatfield. He was in Chicago, and I went there to a seminar. And Fred Hatfield was at the time, he was the first human being to squat 1,000 pounds, and he's has a PhD and super, super smart man. But I watched him walk up to the podium. I'm like, there's no way. And the guy's in his mid-50s. Do I want this for my future? He could barely walk. So you start looking back to making mistakes. You realize that, why is my back bothering me and I'm 28 years old? Why are my knees bothering me? Is this why do I have Achilles issues? Because I'm too much plyometrics. So you start learning that maybe this isn't the path. Is this really, am I supposed to feel like this in my early 30s? And I look back and now I'm getting closer to 70. My body feels so much better, but I train completely differently.
Yeah, I was watching the Rodney Coleman documentary. You've seen it too. Very fascinating. If you're not interested in that, maybe not, but it's very interesting for, I think, everybody. But it's an example of somebody that achieves so much in a way that maybe isn't the best thing for you long term, but his beliefs are so strong on those things because of the success of, what was he, 8-time Mr. Olympia, six-time, whatever it is.
8-time. Mm-hmm.
He cannot walk, his body's breaking down, and he still trains, doesn't sleep, like he's always done. So that's one of the extremes, but it happens every day. Is, we can't tell you how many women come to see us in their 50s or 60s and tell us so they only eat 1,200 calories and they have for the last 30 years. The reason they're coming to see us is they have some symptoms, but they're still so fixated. I can't change this. I never know, because if I do this, I'm gonna balloon up. And those are some of the mistakes that people are not willing to make because they create these box of beliefs that they nail shut.
Again, my mom, your grandmother, she always believed that if she quit smoking, she was smoking 2 packs of Pall Mall non-filters. And I was trying to talk, Mom, come on, you gotta, she goes, I'll gain weight. But in her belief, she believed that. But when she quit smoking, she was never, ever lighter than she was, probably the last 20 years of her life. She changed completely how she ate, how she moved. And really, it gave her,
and it probably didn't
20 years of life.
It probably didn't happen overnight either. So like that's the fear of, I got to change and I got to do something different, and you might go backwards to go forward. That's part of this, eliminating the fear from the decisions that we're making. If I'm trying to be a better golfer, back to golf, I didn't realize today's going to be a golf lesson, but for me to be the golfer I am today, I actually had to be a worse golfer for a period of time that was longer than I enjoyed it in the moment. But looking back, it was a blip. But if I wasn't willing to make mistakes or have that period, I may have quit golf, or I may have just never gotten any better. And that's something that I think a lot of people really can think about is, let's just say you just don't feel like you want to, but you got all these habits and rituals and programs and supplements that you've been taking. It might take a little bit of time for us to round the corner and go in a different direction, but still don't be against making mistakes or the ability to try something new, because that is how we get better. Is if we're not growing, we're dying. And if we're not evolving, I think we're going to start to see that we don't have the results that we want. And it leads to, go ahead.
I think that's the number one message of this podcast today, is that you have to go backwards. The Olympics is going on right now. Every backstory is what you're talking about. Every one of them, they're not all peaking. They all have injuries or setbacks or personal challenges. Look at Simone, the number one gymnast of all time. For her to come back, but she said, I'm going to give it a shot. It's better to try than not to try. And I think that's what's really, enlightening for me watching these Olympics is all the setbacks people have. But watching the men last night, it was like a bunch of little boys, and they were just, it made me almost cry. They were so excited by taking
winning the
third
bronze.
in a bronze. Yeah. And you looked at some of the Chinese gymnasts, and they didn't look happy. And I thought to myself, there's so many setbacks. So what you're saying right there is really the essence of this podcast, is that we're all going to have mistakes. We're all going to have setbacks, but some of the best stuff is in the pain, is when you come out of the, you think this will never change. You do change. We all change. I've made tons of mistakes in my career. And then you realize, okay, and including my health. But I think that's the key, is you want to make these mistakes. People ask me all the time, why do you take golf lessons? And some of my friends going, well, why does he take golf lessons? Because I feel like I want to get better. And that's the exciting piece, is that sometimes you do get better and sometimes you don't. But I think that's what's the essence of today, is that we're all going to make mistakes, and sometimes the best stuff is coming out of that.
Yeah, and we talked about, Dr. Phil always liked to use the terminology that proof's in the pudding, and his stance on it was, it's actually tasting the pudding. And the point of that is, like, you can follow what you've read or what the podcast you're listening to and say the proof's in the pudding recipe or what it looks like. But it's really about you individually tasting the pudding, because everybody's different. You might be in a different season of your life. You may have a different feeling. Maybe you have different taste buds. Maybe you have different passions from an exercise movement standpoint. Maybe you have a different schedule. Maybe you work in the night shift and sleep is tough in different periods. But it's about tasting the pudding and then having the self-awareness that how I feel, my health, are you aware of that to a point where you can say, yeah, I think what I'm doing is working and I feel real good, versus being aware that I got some limitations that I'd like to maybe improve, whether it's the scale or your skin, your digestion or your blood work. All that information allows us to say, okay, if we do the same thing, we can't expect a different result. I think everyone agrees to that, but we see it time and time again. People do the same thing over and over and over again, and they expect a different result. Same thing with Rodney Coleman. If I felt, I assume he doesn't feel good based on what I see him. Barry can walk. He's got the walkers. I would want to do something different, but you get so set in your ways, and you may have taught yourself to believe that this is just what it is.
But you'd have to bring in other counsel. You have to get other eyeballs and say, hey, and then have in fact, we were just talking about this today, but then you have to have the trust that, maybe I should try something different. I remember my first two bodybuilding contest, I was taught by people in the know that you have to bulk up and you have to cut down. And I did that. I got out to 232 pounds my first contest, and I competed at 170, I lost 62 pounds, and I looked fantastic on stage. And then my next contest was about 7-8 years later, after you guys were born. I did the same thing. I bulked up to 220 and I competed again at 170. And I'm driving back from Grand Rapids, and I still remember this conversation with myself is, what are you doing? Why are you getting really unhealthy to get up on stage? And I said, there's got to be a better way. So then my next contest from there on out, I didn't bulk up at all. I'd maybe be 180. I'd compete at 165. And I thought, it's not about being bigger and getting the trophy and whatever. It was about, how do I be really healthy and challenge myself from that standpoint? And that's what I did from there on out. Now, was I the biggest bodybuilder? And no. But for me, my goal is, how do I get in the best shape possible, but also being the healthiest that I can be? And so I had to completely change my mindset from everybody telling me what to do. And then I realized, I don't care who it is. I know exactly how it works because I did it. I tasted the pudding.
Yeah. And I think that's what we'll wrap up with is I think there's several things that we see right now that are going to be those mistakes that I can point out from a mile away. maybe you have to make them yourself. Part of our job is to guide people on to hopefully maybe not experiencing some mistakes that I think we can avoid. I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do is, I look at the ketogenic diet, it's coming out that, really was not correct for 99% of the population. But a lot of people that were so gung-ho and saved lives and changed their world, they had to experience that, there is a pro and a con to everything, and you got to balance that. Or the carnivore diet, or the creatines and the pre-workouts and post-workouts. In our last podcast, we talked about energy drinks. There's going to be a lot of these mistakes that maybe we look back 30 years and say, I can't believe any of us were doing those things. But that's why we came up with the 3 principles. And the idea around the 3 principles was to guide people on parameters without giving the prescription, to allow people to fill out their own lifestyle. So these principles are the bedrocks. They're like gravity. They won't change, but the stuff in the notes, the space between the notes, is all up to the individual. So think about our 3 principles. The source. Can you eat whatever you're eating, drinking, supplements, beverages, whatever you're putting in your body? Is there a closer to the source option? And is there a closer to the source option that you think you can do? Is there a closer to the source option that you think that you will like? Because the closer we go to the source, it's going to be cheaper and healthier. That's principle number 1. Doesn't mean that I'm telling you to eat 3 grams of broccoli, 10 chicken breasts a week. There's no prescription to it. It's a principle. Number 2 is pH balance. Are you allowing your body to have the right pH balance to absorb the right minerals, to keep the right minerals, put a lot of pressure on the other parts of the body? Is stress impacting your health? Is lack of sleep, too much exercise? Our body has this pH. And again, it's a principle, and understanding that if I have acid reflux, it's a good chance that my pH is too acidic. Instead of saying, you got to do this, this, and this, which will give you a plan to follow, but also understanding if you follow the pH principle, the body will start to self-correct. And the last principle, and I think our favorite principle, is the genesis of our entire program, is your body's cell health, cellular function. Your body's made of these cells, 50 trillion cells. And your health is dictated on the health of your cells. So this is where we understand that this belief or this mistake that we need to count calories, or calories equal a calorie, or you shouldn't have any fat, or egg whites are better than the yolk. This principle of the cell health starts to blow holes into that. And it gives you this philosophy and principle to understand it's not necessarily what it says on the nutritional fact panel. It's more what it's going to do to your cells. And when you came up with these 3 principles, I think really ultimately what you're doing is you're trying to give people parameters to help them do the best job of not making too drastic of mistakes. But even inside these 3 principles, I can list several different things that you still have to make some mistakes. Is it possible for you to, get wild caught Alaskan salmon? Let's just say I'm trying to go to the source and I like fish. You start to realize it's really hard to get access to it. Maybe for the budget I have, it's too expensive. That could be a mistake that you have to figure out yourself, and maybe come up with an alternative option inside that parameter. So I really think our principles, which we don't get enough chance to talk about because they're a little deep in today's short form content, I think this is our way of helping people navigate, I would say, catastrophic mistakes or bigger mistakes. But I think the message today is, even inside these parameters, we will have to get our toe in the water. We will have to make the pudding. And then ultimately, you got to taste the pudding and figure out if it's for you. Any last minute words or mistakes as we let everyone go for the week?
I think the last point you're making is that the reason we don't give people this is the formula you have to follow, or a certain structure. It's a structure, but inside the structure, you have to have that wiggle room. I look at Dave Ramsey's, principles, and it's really interesting. He has these baby steps, and it's no different. You just follow the plan, and that's what the principles are. It's just like, hey, can I eat higher quality food close to the source? Is my pH maybe a little bit more alkaline? Can I make it better than being too acidic? And is it good for my cells? And if you ask those questions, it gives you a little framework. And I think that's the goal, is that we want you to go out and enjoy your life, and then learning how to pivot, and not saying, hey, I don't have to be so rigid or regimented. Again, these are just parameters. And I think that's the goal today, is just what you said really at the beginning is, let's learn how to come back from some of these things. Not always pleasant, but how do we round the corner and grow and thrive? And that increases capacity and all the stuff we've been talking about the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway, is we must make mistakes. I want you to leave this podcast and go make some mistakes. Go try an exercise routine and fail miserably, or try a recipe your family hates, or make mistakes. The best things will come out of those mistakes, I guarantee it. And I think one of the best quotes we can share with our kids and our society is from Robert Kiyosaki. And it's, you can't just give people fish. You have to teach them how to fish. And I think that's why we did this podcast today, is we see a lot of people just wanting the fish. Just give me the fish. Give me the hack. Give me the trick. Give me the protocol. It's not going to work long term. We have to learn how to fish. And as you know, Dad, I don't like to fish, but the philosophy that we got to teach more people how to fish, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're on a mission to do. And a big part of teaching people how to fish, you got to go out and not catch any fish. And that's the mistakes. But your job this week, next week, going forward, is don't be scared of the mistakes. Go make some mistakes. Share some of the mistakes. Have some fun with these mistakes, because you're always going to learn something. And that's how we continue the progress and evolution for growth. We'll see you again next time. Again, anytime you want to send us a note, what you like, what you don't like, what you want to hear more of. We heard so many people's resting heart rate, blood pressure, breaths per minute after the cardio podcast. info@ontargetliving.com, and we'll see you on the other end of your next mistake. Bye-bye.